This conversation is for general information only and not legal advice. The views expressed herein are that of the speakers and not necessarily First American. As of November 21st, 2025, FinCEN's REE regulations go into effect March 1st, 2026, subject to change. Listeners should consult with their own advisors. Welcome back, everyone, to First on Fraud. I'm Sarah Frano, your fierce fraud-fighting friend, and I'm joined with me, as always, by my smart and funny co-host, Matt Sager. The new expanded FinCEN regulations are set to take effect March 1st, 2026, including new complex reporting requirements. And these changes require precision, speed, and our teams have spent well over a year crafting and building everything that you need to make compliance clear, quick, and reliable. But beyond what's changing, we here at First on Fraud wanted to understand the why behind FinCEN and really what is the driving force. So today we're continuing our fascinating conversation with John Cassara, former CIA, former Secret Service, FinCEN superhero extraordinaire. He is the nation's leading expert on anti-money laundering. John, thank you for joining us again. Let's start with the question I know that's on my mind and probably our listeners as well, which is, why is real estate such a beloved place for criminals to hide and clean their money?
There are lots of different reasons why. I think one of the primary is because real estate can be high value transactions. So if you're a money launderer, it goes back to, greed. If you have a lot of money that you want to try to launder and integrate, there are few things out there better than real estate that will accommodate high value transactions. I think the other thing it's important to understand is that money launderers are in effect businessmen too, right?
You make money. Yeah, you make money on real estate when the property values are going up. They're making money off of their money.
They're in it for profit, and real estate also offers a sense of legitimacy. The American real estate sector is very, very stable, good return on the investments. Real estate investment can allow criminals to somewhat remain anonymous through these complex ownership structures, lack of beneficial ownership information, straw purchases, who's really behind it. Real estate allows for cash purchases. Again, this stuff should be reported, but it allows for cash purchases. Some investments out there are not that susceptible, if you will, for cash purchases. Price manipulation kind of goes back to the trade-based thing I'm talking about, the over and under invoicing. What's the real price here? Is it something that doesn't make market or economic sense? Is it overvalued and they're paying cash for it anyway? They don't care. And I think historically, the real estate sector has faced less regulatory scrutiny than some other sectors of the economy, of the investment world. Lack of industry oversight. Again, there's been some exemptions granted to the real estate sector over the years. For example, the USA Patriot Act, when it came online, globally, some countries are better than others when it comes to anti-money laundering enforcement and enforcement in the real estate sector in general. And criminals are always attracted to the weaker link.
Are we a weak link?
We are not a weak link, but when it comes to the real estate sector, there's a whole lot more that we should be doing.
Yeah, that begs the question, what should we be doing?
So I think there are a number of things that real estate professionals can do to kind of protect themselves against money laundering. One of the first things they can do is to kind of educate themselves a little bit about what money laundering is and some suspicious activities that are found in the real estate industry. And one of the things they can do along those lines is to implement a strong kind of a customer due diligence or kind of know your customer procedure. They want to verify the identities of all buyers as best as they can, including those purchasing through LLCs or trusts. Try to obtain, if you can, the proof of the origin of the funding, especially for high value purchases. Try to identify the ultimate beneficial owner behind the purchase. Be wary of cash transactions, and especially those above the reporting threshold. I think for real estate, it's sky high. But again, if something doesn't seem right, I'd be wary.
A lot of our listeners are real estate agents, residential, but money laundering is commercial as well, correct?
It's everything. And just there's a danger too of just purchasing raw land. I mean, we see this more and more in the news. There's not only is it anti-money laundering concerns, but also national security concerns because of the location of some of these properties.
We've certainly seen that. That's a whole nother episode in itself, right? So FinCEN doesn't stop money laundering. There's nothing to stop a real estate deal that's used, money. So, a report gets filed. What happens next, on the government side?
So a report gets filed with FinCEN. I think it's important to understand that FinCEN is not an enforcement arm, even though enforcement is in the word FinCEN, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. FinCEN doesn't do investigations. FinCEN takes the information, the financial intelligence, and hands it off to criminal investigators at the federal, state, and local level, okay? But does not have any special agents. It does not have any arrest powers, if you will.
It doesn't have enforcement.
It likes to say it's involved with enforcement, but it's not. It is a regulatory body. It regulates the Bank Secrecy Act, the financial intelligence reporting that we talked about. It will levy fines for noncompliance. The definition of enforcement that I know, that I'm comfortable with, that I spent my career in, FinCEN is not involved with money laundering enforcement.
So years ago, when I was in private practice, in real estate private practice, I had a client who bought a business, and that included, the physical structure as well as the actual business. And it wasn't not less than a month later, did I have both the Department of Homeland Security and the Treasury Department in my office wanting to see the transaction files. My client fully cooperated with everything that they wanted to see. Was that the seller had been using the business as a money laundering place. And my client has suspected once he purchased, because all the inventory, he had gotten a complete inventory of everything in the store, but once he got in there, everything had been expired. All the food items were expired. Everything had, dust on it, if you will. It was two different departments who had reached out. Is that common?
Yeah, as far as say law enforcement knocking on your door and wanting assistance in this type of thing.
Well,
yes.
Two different agencies. One was Department of Homeland Security and the other was the Treasury Department.
Well, first of all, they work hand in hand because Homeland Security used to be part of Treasury, if you will. It was created out of Customs and then merged that with the Immigration and Naturalization Service. So Homeland Security, they still use a lot of the Treasury data. They work hand in glove. One thing that I would like to say, because your question triggered a thought here, and we're talking about SARS filing information with FinCEN and this type of thing. Real estate professionals, you're not required to file suspicious activity reports, right? But you can. It's voluntary. You can do it. And law enforcement would appreciate it. If you see something that you think desperately needs attention, file a SAR. The other thing is, and this is, I can't emphasize this enough, if you are in the middle of a transaction that just doesn't smell right, that you feel in your gut is really not right, is suspicious that there's something else is going on here, call law enforcement, report it as it is going on, because sometimes law enforcement will take that tip, start an immediate investigation, and maybe want to insert themselves in an undercover capacity and run with it and see where it goes.
Now, do you mean local law enforcement or federal?
Really depends on the case. If I was advising somebody, you could start at one level and go to another. See, the problem that you're going to, and it depends whether this is, a city or a small town somewhere, your backyard better than anybody else, and what may or not be appropriate. The question is to try to get to the right person and sell them on your case, if you will, or alert them to this case. They may say no. It may be you'll never hear from them again. But if it's something that is large enough and you think it's of import, please, take the initiative, be aggressive, reach out to law enforcement. They will appreciate it.
So what should someone do, though, if they're contacted by law enforcement while they're in the middle of a transaction?
If they would be so kind to cooperate, right? Cooperate, give them what they need. They'll probably be asking for perhaps any records involved, which, by the way, you have to keep records for law enforcement for 5 years. Okay.
On cash
Um,
deals.
yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
So you mentioned there are some things that real estate agents can be aware of that might be suspect. What are some of those things? If I'm in the middle of a transaction, I think I've got a fantastic buyer. What should I be looking out for? Even the seller. I mean, I'm assuming these money launderers eventually need to sell the properties, right?
Not always. Sometimes they'll just hold them for an investment.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah.
Do they
Yeah.
rent them out?
They can. Again, it depends. But yeah, sometimes it'll be like a prestige property for them, right? They'll just hold it. Or maybe they'll use it to domicile, their children going to school here in this country or something like that. Lots of different reasons. I would definitely try to find out the best of your ability, who these people really are, the source of their funds. Are they from a high risk area or not? Are they, we call them in anti-money laundering parlance, politically exposed people? Are they people that are in areas that are in the news, that are politically influential, that are in effect oligarchs themselves or attached to oligarchs? And I mention this simply because this happens time and time again, and we need to know that, if possible, that these people have backgrounds that need further scrutiny.
Are they more often, though, using people to hide behind them? Because I will come across some deals and I'm like, there's no way that this 19-year-old is buying a $3 million property. And I know that wealth can come to people in all sorts of ways, but when I dig into the person, I'm like, there's actually no way.
They use all different types of people. Again, they use straw purchasers. They'll use, as you just described, they'll use young people to do this. They'll use, the average, suburban housewife, if you will. They'll use all different kinds of people.
How do
They'll
they recruit
diverse
these people?
money. They'll use, and they'll do it on apps, for example, social apps. And they'll just find people that basically for a fee will do their bidding for them.
What I sometimes worry about is uh, realtors, their livelihood is closing real estate transactions. And so we encourage them on the one hand to find out and get involved and get this information. And yet, on the other hand, it sounds like when they get this information, they may be reluctant to do anything because it may interfere with their transaction. What do you have any advice, or what do you say about that potential conflict between closing your transaction and finding out if it's a legitimate transaction?
I understand that this is going to be burdensome for a lot of people in the industry. And I also understand that if a SAR is reported, it could jeopardize a particular sale. It could jeopardize a very lucrative commission. I understand that, but at the same time, I think we all should understand that money laundering and the transnational criminal activities behind money laundering are growing, and it's a very important threat that affects us as individuals. It affects our families. It affects our communities. It affects society as a whole. We, the authorities, can't do this without your help. We need your help. It may be a hard choice, but please make the right choice. And I'll thank you in advance for it. Law enforcement will never second guess you if you just call and say, look, this may be nothing, but I feel uncomfortable about this situation. I just want to report it to you. This is the situation. they'll definitely hear you out. And you never know where those kinds of tips lead. There's been excellent cases made over the years, not just in the real estate sector, but from, John Q. citizens seeing something in the community and picking up the phone and calling. And that's how we make cases.
For the average bear, I know in your career, you probably had access to a lot of information that the normal person obviously does not have. So when we're talking about, hey, try to look at this person and figure things out, what can the average person use? What kind of resources or tools can they use to dig in and find out more about their customer?
I think today it's probably easier than ever because, 20 years ago when I was doing a lot of this stuff, the internet was not as prominent as it is today. We didn't have the resources that we had today. There's so much available in the public domain that we didn't have. Yeah, sure, classified information then, classified information now, but it's amazing what is out there if you go look. I mean, if you do your queries online, you can come up with all kinds of things. You guys know that as well as I do. I mean, from what you do.
For more stories behind the headlines, subscribe to First on Fraud and stay one step ahead of the issues that impact your transactions, your timelines, and your bottom line. So listen, we asked our audience, we polled them before. We said, if you had 30 seconds with a former CIA spy, what would you want to learn about? They were given 4 options. 1, how do spies really track money? 2, the most shocking case you've ever had. 3, FinCEN's secret tools. Or 4, myths on money laundering. You want to guess which one the audience was the highest one that was picked?
I forgot your descriptor, but I think it's the most shocking case I've worked.
Yes, actually, that is it. It was your most shocking case ever. People will be here. And then the second choice was, the second highest was how spies really track money. So, and I think you've done an awesome job of telling us all about that, but they want to hear, what is your most shocking case ever?
I'm not going to say it was the most shocking case. I'll say it's the most important case I ever worked that ultimately failed, but yet was probably the most successful case I ever worked. With that as an introduction, it goes back a long ways. I was sent out to Rome in 1990 to work at the American Embassy to combat Italian organized crime, the mafia, by looking at the flow of dirty money going back and forth between Italy and the United States. We examined financial intelligence, and it was really the first truly international anti-money laundering task force set up between the U.S. Customs Service and the Italian Guardia Finanza. Well, very shortly after I got out there, we got a request for information from our customs office in Los Angeles. The largest money laundering case in history had just been completed. It was called Operation Polar Cap. It was the largest money laundering case in history at the time. This was in the late 1980s. It was over $1 billion was laundered primarily through the misuse of the international gold trade, right?
Yeah.
And it was set up in the gold district of Los Angeles. There were some individuals involved, primarily Armenian jewelers. And while law enforcement was monitoring the comings and goings, they had cameras up and they had microphones embedded in the store and all this stuff. There was a guy that walked in and people were very deferential to him. And they never understood who his name was, but he seemed to be like one of the bosses of the operation. The only thing they could figure out was his name, and I'm changing it. I'm changing a name. His name was Vinny, and he was from Vicenza, Italy, right? And he was somewhat of prominence, someone in the gold industry. That's all they knew. So the case went down, and I'm in Rome, and I get this undeveloped lead, we call it. Who is Vinny of Vicenza? Find out about him. Let us know. So anyway, I spent the next 2 years of my life working in my task force to try to find out who is Vinny of Vicenza. And I found out probably more than I ever wanted to know. He was of prominence. He was in the gold industry in Italy, originally from the Middle East, very much involved with trade-based money laundering, a lot of invoice fraud manipulation, misuse of the international gold trade. And working with my analyst, who was assigned with us in the task force, we identified properties, real estate, not only in the United States, but elsewhere around the world, including in Italy, including other areas of the world. After 2 years, and I was in 3 or 4 continents, numerous countries, developed sources, because human sources are the best source of information for these types of cases. I
You
use
mean
my old
spies? You mean
my
spies?
old CIA background, and I developed sources in numbers of different countries, found out an incredible wealth of information about this guy and his family, wrote up a very, very lengthy criminal syllabus, flew to Washington, D.C., because it had to be Washington, D.C., because the Department of Justice has an international office there that would take that kind of case and work it. And they were very receptive and studied it. And then finally, at the end of the day, declined prosecution. We declined prosecution because we couldn't, with exactitude, if you will, establish the nexus between narcotics trafficking and all his properties and all his resources and all his assets and everything else. So they reluctantly declined. That's why I said it was probably the most disappointing case I ever worked, but it was at the same time the most successful, because sometimes in our failures, we ultimately win. And you can use it in the case, and you could probably use that in life as well. But because of that case, I learned about the misuse of the international gold trade, which is extremely important in anti-money laundering. Learned about, Hawala, underground financial systems, this type of stuff. Basically, learning things, using things that I've drawn on and incorporated in all different further types of investigations and my writings and everything else. So it was a very, very successful case in that respect. Unsuccessful that we didn't get the stats that drive law enforcement.
John, I saw one of, your speakings about our fail rate when it comes to money laundering. You want to talk a little bit about that while we're talking about the disappointment of failure to prosecute these things?
That's something else that, again, I've looked at this for about 30 plus years now. And if you look at the numbers, I call them the metrics that matter. So why are we doing all this? The reason we're doing all this, for example, financial intelligence reporting requirements, all these onerous rules and regulations, why do we do this? For basically 2 reasons: to successfully investigate, arrest, and prosecute the bad guys, and basically to take away, seize, freeze, forfeit their assets, their criminal proceeds. Those are the 2 bottom line metrics. If you look at those 2 bottom line metrics, you can only say that we have failed, because the data that's out there, put out by a wide variety of entities in the United States, the United Nations, Interpol, others, basically looking at the amount of criminal assets here in the US and international that we actually forfeit every year, going back to that 4 trillion plus number I was talking about, well less than 1% is actually forfeited. I like to use a quote from Raymond Baker. Raymond said a few years ago that, looking at these numbers, said total failure is only a decimal point away. And then if you look at the other metric that matter, okay, which is basically successful prosecutions and convictions in the United States, to be a money launderer and to be caught and convicted, you have to be either really, really stupid or really, really unlucky. And it hurts me to say that.
It's painful to hear, as someone like me who is a fraud fighter, right? And I know all of the people who are listening, they're listening because they're interested in fighting fraud as well.
We're talking about a high fail rate. Do you think with this influx of information that's going to be received, do you think there's going to be a change? when we have more information and more access to data? Do you see a change with that success?
I hope so. Honestly, Matt, I hope so. I'm doubtful, and I don't want to deflate you or the audience. In a certain respect, we've made an awful lot of progress in anti-money laundering over the last 30 years. For example, when I went out to Rome and I worked on that anti-money laundering task force with my Italian colleagues, we called it Operation Primo Passo. Primo Passo means first step in Italian. It was first step because the Italians were literally taking the first step. They didn't have an anti-money laundering law. They didn't have financial intelligence. They didn't have an FIU. They didn't have literally anything. And now they're one of the best out there regarding, combating money laundering. And that same scenario has been replicated in many areas around the world. So in a certain respect, we've made tremendous progress in the last 30 years. Going back to your question again, the more data you have, the better data you have. Big data. You dump everything into these great big data processing networks, and you come up with all kinds of great information. But what concerns me is the fact that it comes down to people. So you can be working at FinCEN and you can have the best information in the world, and you can write it up, and you can come up with a great case referral, right? And you can send it out, and you can say, here you are, special agent so-and-so. Here is a great case. Go work it. Well, that's where we're falling down, because we don't have enough people out on the streets to work those cases. They can't be worked in a financial intelligence unit. Financial intelligence of whatever form rarely by itself makes a case. It is one piece of the investigative jigsaw puzzle. You have to combine that with, maybe undercover approaches or surveillance or intercepts or just a wide variety of classic law enforcement techniques. You overlap that with financial intelligence, and then you make a case. But there's no shortcuts involved. It's labor intensive. You got to work the cases, and we don't have enough people out there to make the cases, and perhaps not enough expertise in these financial crimes.
What we're hopeful of is this reporting and these new requirements to report come at a great expense and a ton of work. This is a big change, and so we're hopeful that we are going to see some greater success, because it's a lot of work. Every transfer of property that is not financed with the bank has to be reported. So there's an expense and cost with that. So we're hopeful to see that there will be a change and some greater success in going after the money launderers.
And I hope you're right. I'd like to say I'm optimistic, but I'm a realist as well. So I hope you're right. It is the right step. I talked a little bit about the Financial Action Task Force and how important it is in the world of anti-money laundering efforts. Back in 2016, the FATF, representatives of the FATF, came into the United States and examined our anti-money laundering record and how we adhere to the FATF 40 recommendations to combat money laundering. They rate countries periodically for compliance and non-compliance and this type of thing. One of the areas that we were dinged in more than any others were compliance by non-financial businesses and professionals. Things like attorneys, accountants, real estate agents. We were falling down, and they zinged us bad. So this is a step in the right direction as far as correcting some of that.
So, John, this has been absolutely fascinating. Any final takeaways for our listeners? What do you want them to know most about money laundering, what's happening in this world, and where this is all going in the future? What is the biggest takeaway you want to share?
I want to thank them, because you're going to be doing a lot of work. Many of you already are, and you probably hardly ever get thank yous. You probably also hardly ever get any feedback. You'll report this information and you'll never hear back again.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons for that, but I do want to take this opportunity to thank you for your hard work, for the money that you spend, for management giving us, the resources to do what you do, and let you know that your efforts are appreciated, not only by me, but my law enforcement colleagues throughout the country. So thank you. The other message that I would like to pass on is something that I mentioned in passing earlier, and that is money laundering and the criminality that behind it affects all of us. You probably, on your phones, right? You probably get zinged almost every day like I do with all different kinds of come-ons. It affects us. It affects our lives. Why are they doing this? For greed, right? For greed, for money. The only way that we're going to combat this is to have the assistance, the help, the interest from everybody out there. Again, this affects us as individuals. It affects our communities. It affects our families. So as difficult as this sometimes might be, please do your part. Help us. We really do appreciate it.
John, incredible information today. I have learned so much. I've learned about things I didn't want to learn about. That's how much I have learned about this today. You've written some books. Where can we find out about these books you've written, and where would you like our listeners to go to learn more about you and your books?
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, I've written 6 books primarily on anti-money laundering and counterterrorism finance. You can find them on Amazon. That's the easiest way to do it. Just John Cassara and put in money laundering, whatever it is. Those books will come up. Or better yet, go to my website, John Cassara, Cassara.com. If you want to send me any kind of query or just chat, send me an email at john@johncassara.com. I'd love to hear from you.
Well, John, it has been an absolute pleasure. We thank you for your time today and for all your very valuable key insights on money laundering and FinCEN. This has been phenomenal. I can't thank you enough. I am a huge fan of your career, your work, and everything that you have done to help educate not only, the public, but governments and everyone on money laundering. Thank you all for joining us again on First on Fraud. First American is ready for FinCEN, and we are here to make it easier for you. Check out the FinCEN Quick Reference Guide. It is a super handy one-page resource that breaks down exactly what you need to know and which transactions are covered. Grab it and share by clicking the link in the show notes below, or you can email us here at firstonfraud@firstam.com. This episode is copyright 2025 by First American Financial Corporation, all rights reserved.